Welcome to the Roundtable here at the Overseas Ministries Study Center. My name is Easten Law. I serve as the Associate Director at the Center, and I am overjoyed and privileged to be able to speak today with Dr. Jennifer Aycock, who is an Assistant Professor of Religion at James Madison University down in Virginia. And it's really just a joy to be able to sit down and chat with you a little bit about your journey in scholarship and in this field of world Christianity, in part because we share some common roots, actually.
We do.
Yeah, we both, Dr. Aycock and I, did our undergraduate work at Wheaton College. Mm-hmm. And since then, our paths diverged a little bit, and now they've come back together. So it's really fun to be able to sit and chat with you today.
Yeah, it's a joy to have our paths reconverge. So, yeah, right. It's great.
Well, the purpose of the OMSC Roundtable, this new media series and interviews that we have, is really to engage the wide range of scholarship and the stories of world Christianity scholars, and what their views of the field are, what their specific research interests are, the way that they've informed. And so would you mind just starting off by sharing a little bit about your academic training? Where did you get your PhD, and why were you interested in studying that field?
Yeah. So I pursued my PhD at Emory University's Graduate Division of Religion. And I was very fortunate to have a great interdisciplinary cohort of fellow PhD colleagues. And also, I was the first PhD student in world Christianity, like officially at Emory. So part of actually the draw to Emory's program was getting to kind of build something from within as a student. Really drew me to the program, along with then just the amazing scholars I got to work with, including Jehu Hansel, Arun Jones. I didn't work with Deanna Womack, but she was certainly there. Diane Stewart. Mm-hmm. And Jonathan Strom, who is not himself in global Christianity or world Christianity, but brings just a wealth of wisdom as a historian, and to particularly working in archives that had a bearing on my training. So I'm sure I'm missing somebody, but the draw to Emory was the faculty and the opportunity to get to build something from within as a student. And I didn't want to inherit something. I wanted to work on it.
That's really exciting. It's wonderful to be able to enter something and feel like you can chart your own path within.
Yeah.
Within a new system, new possibilities. Mm-hmm. So a pioneering spirit. That's great.
Yeah. And it ended up, I will add this in my both coursework and exams, meaning that I took courses in sociology department, so theories of race and racism. I took several seminars in the history department, and I took courses in religion, both like in the religion department, and then a couple of directed studies that were bridged between the School of Theology and religion. So there really could be, and at every turn that was encouraged. Mm-hmm. Professors in those other departments that typically didn't have religion students come take courses were quite keen to engage. So it was just a very rich experience in that way.
That's very exciting to hear. It sounds like it was the right place, and a great embodiment of what we hope world Christianity as a field really is for those interdisciplinary conversations.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Kudos to Emory and Cameron for fostering that kind of a space.
Yes, I would encourage anyone to check it. Like, there should be always a pipeline to Emory.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that space trained you so well, and today you are working as a assistant professor at James Madison, which is a state university within Virginia.
Yeah.
Would you care to share a little bit about your current workplace, especially in a department that is dedicated to the study of religion, so it's a little bit different, perhaps,
right,
than where you were trained, and what's it like for you now at James Madison?
Yes. Well, I'm only in my second semester, so I can give you the very early on perspective, but I have just wonderful colleagues who are working across different religious cultures and traditions. And so it's a department of fairly robust conversation across between faculty. And then with students, we, as a department, really serve the general education curriculum significantly. So every tenure track faculty member plus several contingent faculty plus instructors who are kind of permanent full-time teach our offerings of general education requirements. So that's really the core of our department. And then we all have our areas of specialization that we offer, of course, upper levels and seminars. But I think that contributes to, we're all teaching in the general education requirements. We're thinking about students together in that way. And we all have different priorities in those courses because we teach religions of the world and religion, meaning, and spirituality. So, we're asking different questions from our locations, but I think it makes it a curious and robust place to be a very junior faculty member and colleague. So I've enjoyed it immensely. So
fantastic. Just that the name of that course, religion, spirituality, meaning, it is how we make meaning. And it's great that a state university offers that kind of resource for all students.
Well, and I think there is an awareness within the department. Again, I'm new, so I'm learning these things, but there's an awareness within the department that we are located in Central Virginia, and we draw increasingly nationally, but we've historically drawn from within the state. There's increasing draws from other mid-Atlantic states, but there is a religious heritage in the region that I think the department feels like a kind of responsibility to engage. So, for example, we offer global religious cultures minor and major, but we also offer Christian studies minor, specifically because there actually are a lot of students from a Christian background that might have to, and of course, we're teaching the academic study of, we're not teaching this confessionally at a public university, but it allows students to really broaden their horizons around their own traditions. I mean, of course, I probably have a bias around that in the sense of I will advise that minor, but I think just that kind of awareness more broadly within the department, and I think it goes along not only with the culture of kind of the regional culture, but also the reality that what I'm finding every semester as I ask my students, where are you from and where do you want to go? Everyone loves Virginia. And so, I really take then teaching these courses, and I think my other students do, is like, this is the space of actual intercultural thinking and encounter that might open up some new insights on a world that may or may not be pursued in the rest of one's life, right? But to kind of like at least put the conversations out there.
Absolutely.
And I see that as very much kind of a dynamic in our department.
That's really great that your department has that sort of view, and offering that to students who, to have that global worldview, even if they don't themselves want to sort of travel and be a part of all those things. It's great to see that.
Yeah.
I was raised in Maryland, so I love Maryland and I like Virginia, but it's okay. The University of Maryland doesn't offer anything like this, so you guys.
Right. Well, the Department of Religion just changed its name from Department of Religion to Global Religious Culture. So the department, we kind of still go by religion, but if it's a major, it's that global religious culture. So there's a real intentionality about thinking through these like global lenses on the different fields and disciplines.
That's a great title.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit more then about your own specific focus, sort of what you studied at Emory in terms of subject matter and how that's translated into the types of courses that you teach.
Yeah. So my doctoral work was specifically in African Christian movements at the turn of the 20th century, kind of broadly conceived, right? But to do that work, I also was taking courses in comparative empire, and I've long had an interest in nationalism. I started that during my MDiv, and so those courses, as well as global history outside of global Christianity, which is just such a rich conversation partner. And then my own thinking was very deeply informed by some work with Arun Jones and anthropology of Christianity, that growing field, as well as Africana studies. I think, my doctoral landscape was so rich. I enjoyed coursework and exams every moment. But those fields have certainly informed then what I'm teaching. So I teach primarily Intro to Christianity and global Christian perspectives, but I'm developing those as companion courses, right, to really like take that global lens through and weave that through thematically. So we'll be doing courses on Christ in the colony, post-colony, which is then informed by my own reading and interest in post-colonial theory and studies, and then empire, right? How are we thinking about marginalized communities in relationship to these imperial formations over time? And then as those morph into these national formations. So those are some of the pieces that I work with in teaching and Christianity in Africa. And those are, I'm retooling what I've taught primarily in seminary settings.
I see.
So that's also what I would say is how I'm thinking about my teaching, is I'm using these first couple of years to really listen to the students. So I'm retooling some of the courses I've taught, and then I'm listening to where the students' questions are out of their lived experience and exposure, coming from a variety of like religious, non-religious, religious locations.
Yeah.
And then in a couple of years, then there's a retooling of the material I've developed to really engage. For example, they have massive interest in questions around megachurches. Most of them are curious about biblical interpretation, the Bible, and Christ and Christology. So those are things already this year that I'm like, okay, these are coming to the surface. And then I'm going to work with those to continue to design the courses really in tandem with their questions and lived realities. So I'm enjoying that process of learning who these students are.
Well, yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for that response. I'm touched and encouraged by your response to this question, because sometimes people will just be like, I teach this course, and they dive right into the content.
Oh, yeah.
When you say, I'm teaching this course, you're like, well, I'm thinking about the students, right? So clearly a teacher's heart, and clearly the listening. But something that you said that struck me is how you're retooling the world Christianity training you got in a graduate program, but then you taught in a seminary setting, and now you're in a public university setting that's teaching global religious cultures, and that, this foundation is being communicated differently to different needs, to different spaces. And I just love that, how mindful you are of all of that. It's really great.
Yeah. Well, if I might add too, my seminary teaching experiences were with, was in PCUSA seminary, but also in a HBTI, Historically Black Theological Institution. And so I retooled my courses there. I mean, they were such rich conversations, and also really having to engage as we were excavating these diminished pasts, particularly relative to the global witness of the church, but also the U.S. religious landscape and the trauma that would then come up. And so that work, I was teaching history courses, and that was an invitation to me as a teacher to think about this every week, really working with this material through this lens of particularly teaching students who this deep Christian commitment in Black traditions, while also having lived at the intersections of all of the oppressions, relative to this particular settler nation state. And so I think, I would always communicate to my students. I try to live out a responsive pedagogy. that as things come up in the classroom, that, I'm not going to rewrite the syllabus in the middle of the semester, but we're going to engage what comes up mindfully. And so I think, that retooling continues to be really necessary, I think.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, teaching at a historical PCUSA seminary must be very different than teaching at a historically Black institution as well. So world Christianity is about mining context, and you have mined many contexts. So that's great in terms of your teaching, right? But I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your current research interests. So if you move away from the teaching and pedagogy side that you're clearly gifted and passionate about, what are your current research interests? What are things that you're currently researching or would like to research within your area of expertise?
So my work is really situated within the Black Atlantic Studies kind of conversations, which is a rich interdisciplinary area. And so out of that, on the one hand, I'm working particularly with an African Christian pastor at the turn of the 20th century to think about his kind of flexible subjectivity and how he's naming himself and renaming himself across local, transatlantic, global contexts within the framework of both empire and religious community. So I'm really trying to tease out these threads of Christian consciousness in this like Black Atlantic landscape. But related to that, what has also emerged from that work is reading the mission thought of Louis Garnett Jordan, who was the foreign secretary for the National Baptist Convention. He was at most of the global ecumenical gatherings, the late 19th and into the 20th century. I think he was at NBC through 1922. And no one's written a biography of him on his work. And I mean, he published several volumes. He wrote reports in the convention annual reports, also in the Mission Herald, the newspaper organ for which he initiated. He was a huge proponent of publishing. But his own journey from being an enslaved young Black man in the South to then being a pastor, being sent by his congregation to Liberia to explore immigration. And then that kind of awakening his own journey into really prioritizing this African and building this African mission movement. So situating him as well in the Black Atlantic world, right? And so those are I'm working with these two figures, and with on the one hand, with John Chilembwe with his memory, and with Jordan really with his intellectual legacy. So I think you can get at these questions of like how is a movement built and developed from a variety of angles. I'm actually quite interested in the intellectual scaffolding that he provides. So they're held together in this Black Atlantic world. And so I find myself kind of just toggling between.
That's great. I think there is a trend in world Christianity studies, as diverse regionally and as it is, because I work in Chinese Christianity, but doing the same kinds of trans-Pacific toggling back and forth and seeing how the intellectuals got. So similar, I think similar questions and geographic links, but on two different sides of the world, right? Which leads me to the question that, for this interview series, we always like to ask a little bit about method in terms of how do people go about engaging their questions, right? It sounds like, given your coursework, you've got this great sociological sort of analytical tools, but you're also doing historical work. So how have you settled on a method for going about answering your questions without getting too much into the weeds? Because I love talking method too.
Yes, I think we could turn out on method.
Right, but for people who might be wondering, how do I even start with a question like that? And what should I be doing? I guess that's one way to look at it. Where do you start with those questions?
Where do you start? I mean, I do think for me, one, I would say this to say I've settled on anything is would be an overstatement and bold. And I remember asking actually a professor in PhD seminars, can we have like a conversation on historians and method? And he was like, well, we just kind of borrow. And I thought that was unsatisfactory. So method-wise, on the one hand, I'm really trying to pay attention to primary sources, and Emma Wildwood writes about this in the Nagy Fredericks volume on world Christianity as a methodological approach, like kind of triangulating sources. So I'm thinking about how I'm putting certain sources into conversation. And layering them. So there's the primary source piece. There's also I like to play around with theory, and one of my big long-term dreams is to put Achille Mbembe into conversation with mission history and mission theory. And so, I read Mbembe usually as much as then it gives me a framework conceptually, genealogically, to work with my sources and to think about how what Mbembe is calling attention to. Particularly, I'm working with his Black reason in this moment. And then how he talks about sense of time as lived in particular. So as those help me kind of illuminate the primary sources. So methodologically, I am kind of between, archives and theory, but I would also, I would add to that, I think an important dimension of this work is the secondary literature, that like excavating that, engaging it, and bringing that into conversation. So with the work on John Chilembwe, there's wonderful 1956 volume written about him with the oral history by George Shepperson, William Price, that did phenomenal work. And I'm not setting out to like replace that volume, but what I am trying to think with, so I would add this methodologically, is what are the fragments we have and how do we actually play with those fragments in new ways? So, and I'm influenced in many ways by Tia Miles, Cydia Hartman in this, of thinking about, like, we have these fragments from archives, we have these fragments from memory, and kind of reconstructing then this account of religious or Christian consciousness in particular out of this fragment. So I'm just captivated. And I think also Willie Jennings' work after whiteness and how he, we work in the fragments. Yes. And I think I really take that as a white female scholar doing this work as a ethical imperative in the work as well. Yeah. So it's weaving and working in fragments.
Yeah, weaving and working in fragments. I think that's as theoretical as method can be sometimes you just need a good anchoring metaphor. And working with those fragments very much is a great way of looking as a historian, as well as a sociologist, as well as a theologian, right? We're trying to take this mystery and all these pieces and seeing what we can build.
And I think, I was in Malawi conducting research in March 2020, and I had 6 months of archival research planned. And so that went away. So I came back to my desk in a corner of Atlanta and tried to pick up the pieces. So it really was this sense of, I'm not going to go find anything revelatory or new in an archive now. This is what I've got. I can request some things that are digitized. I can ask for other things. I had a dear colleague, Malawi, send me, I guard them with my life, history seminar papers from a history seminar that ran at Malawi Chancellor College and Humanities College in Zomba. Sent me these seminar papers. So I was like, can I just see how Chilembwe's been written on in these papers? So, it was also of necessity. And I think, for someone starting out in research, there was a way in which I'm so stubborn. No, this will not take it down, but to really actually listen to what is happening in one's lived reality as a researcher and as a thinker, and to lean into that as an invitation. I don't think I would have probably gone thinking about fragments in the way that I was in some ways quite forced to do. And then that became very formative for me. I'm not attempting to write this exhaustive new critical biography of Chilinwe. I'm really wanting to work with these fragments of who he left behind that haven't been explored, and COVID really made that happen. So I think that's an important note to bring in.
We always the research process can seem so clean and simple when you're starting out, and then I think everyone has gone through it realizes that it's much messier, and that you're just never going to have the whole picture, and then you just have to start piecing stuff together. And when we talk about piecing things together, I mean, world Christianity as a field, is in many ways a fragmented field that in recent years people are trying to fit together to say, look, this is world Christianity, but they're doing so with different fragments of a very diverse set of disciplinary backgrounds and perspectives, all with a common concern, of course, for really getting at understanding the experience of the church around the world. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how you see the field of world Christianity right now from your position as somebody who went through a sort of a new world Christianity program, now teaching across different settings with this sort of material. Where do you think world Christianity is at now, and how do you think it's developing?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think about this a bit, and I often wish I had better thoughts on it.
I'm sure they're great.
Well, I wish I had more clarity. I will jokingly say I think we're 3.5 gen world Christianity. And I'm thinking particularly of the methodological considerations volume by Nadine Fredericks, and some of their work around really naming a researcher's positionality, normativity, the public, and the public and political implications of the work. I'm also thinking about the new volumes, the alterity volume and the ecological volume. I'm sorry, titles just totally escape me when I'm being asked about it.
No worries, we'll make a little bit of bibliography.
Yeah, that's right. But I do think broadly conceived, there is an ethical turn developing, and I've seen the arc of that probably in the last 4 years. And we have to think about world Christianity in relationship to the context of academy and world, that it's really trying to be, has been kind of working out itself. And this, I do think this ethical turn is really, seems to me to be, marked by these questions of religious nationalism, these questions of migration, and diaspora experiences and resilience, ecological crisis, violence, and particularly, or not particularly, but also around new questions around gender and sexuality that I think world Christianity has for too long sidestep. So, but all of these, are coming. It's not that they haven't been there.
Right.
It's not that they haven't been there. I think they're being amplified, Like some of the most important work, this is not my area, but in talking with other colleagues, around climate crisis, around maternal health, etc. I mean, listen to African female theologians, right? Like they've been doing this work. So it's not that the work hasn't been done, but I think it's the way in which the field is really like picking this up as shaping its own turn. And I do think, I think I'm beginning to see that more and more. And maybe that is that scholars are feeling and experiencing that we can't just it's not that scholarship prior wasn't done without this kind of attention to the kind of ethical, moral issues of the day. But I think there is a growing sense, and I hear it in the questions being asked at conferences, that if you are younger than 35, you are asking questions of, and I'm gonna like parse it out by age, which you and I are, but we're geriatric millennial. I claim it proudly. But like if your life is being marked in certain ways, people are no longer accepting quiet. Around the ways in which empire, the nation state, and settler colonialism are continuing to authoritarianism, white terror, right? Like we're no longer willing to let power analysis sit to the side. And I think that's the kind of the intersection then with the ethical turn is the power analysis that has, I think, been probably part of world Christianity, certainly, but is becoming more amplified. And I think it's a tension that's opening up because there is this this desire to continue to amplify like local communities, indigenous communities, marginalized histories, marginalized experiences, what happens outside of the institutions. And while bringing those into the center of our world Christian imagination, what cannot be denied is that capitalism, empire, nation state, religion, national are shaping our world.
Yes, absolutely.
Climate degradation. So I think all of these things come together. So I think it's a really productive tension. I don't even know if it's a tension. I mean, I think it's a tension. We can talk.
Well, a tension that pulls, right? Like there's more tension because the pulling is stronger than it used to be. So it's been present,
right?
And no one would say that they don't care about ethics,
right? No, exactly.
But there's something about the situation in the world that's pulling harder, and so you feel the tension more. Which if you were to pluck a string, it makes a higher pitched noise. And so I really appreciate your assessment of that ethical turn. I think that's something we do want to pay attention to within world Christianity. I think it's a great insight, and I know that as you've mentioned before, there you personally as a woman in scholarship, as a woman in world Christianity studies, this is an area that we're also pushing on, and I know it's something that you care quite a bit about. So I do want to invite your thoughts on the role of women in world Christianity studies, whether it's from your own experience or what you're seeing in conversation with colleagues. Things of that sort.
I mean, I think, I've gone to a variety of academic, we'll say conferences and communities. And I do think the world Christianity community is, in a variety of ways, some of the more welcoming places. I mean, I don't find, in fact, you'll go to conferences and, the conveners will make sure that like women are on the planning teams, that, I mean, it goes without saying, but that, you have women on panels, women of privilege in the question asking, women's experiences, center, even, the conference that Princeton and the Overseas Ministry Studies Center held last year in Ghana focused on. So I don't think there's a lack of mindfulness or attention. I think sometimes what I notice is the networks, the quiet networks, how those work in spaces, and who's talking to who about what, right? Like there's still like, I think there is still this. I don't know that it's unique to world Christianity, but I still think there can be these male networks of conversation and publishing. I don't see that necessarily happening in the like a sidelining women's experience or
Right.
contributions and publications and conferences. I do find it's a very mindful community, but it's quiet.
Yeah.
It's much more subtle.
Yeah.
So I think those are things I am more aware of than necessarily kind of what's visible.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's one of those things that, I was trained in some cultural sociology and whatnot. But if not the panels, not the speakers, keynotes, but in those spaces in between where everyone talks, and it's not malicious, but it's just sort of the way that these relational patterns have
Right.
been, and there's still a little bit something there that
Yeah.
is. And so I actually, now that you pointed out, I can see or feel some of that. So I think that's also a really good insight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the sort of the pioneering perspective you've brought to a lot of what we've shared today, whether it's been in the classroom, whether it's been regarding method and sort of, transatlantic, Black experience and history, and even as we talk about this field of world Christianity, this subtle ethical turn given the world that we live in today, and the subtleness of our ways of relating, even within conference settings, even as we're all about amplifying the voices of women, but then there are just subtle patterns, sometimes that we're and I hope that that's what scholarship brings awareness and helps us to address these things. And I'm so excited to see more of how you will build out these insights, whether it's in the classroom in your writing or in conferences and such. So thank you for your time, Jennifer. It's really a joy to talk with you. I want to leave you with one quick question we like to ask, is if you could succinctly sort of share,
Yeah.
I
love how you're like, let me.
No, it's just a concluding remark. We all,
Yeah.
because the art of being able to squeeze all of these complex thoughts into a few words, right? Is if someone were to ask you in an elevator, for example, oh, world Christianity, what is that? What's your response?
Yeah. Succinctly, may I offer 2 points of
course,
elevator responses?
Yeah.
I would say first, to give my scholarly take, right? World Christianity is an approach to the study of religious traditions that uses a variety of methods and perspectives to understand and excavate the polycentric reality that has always characterized Christianity. So I'm influenced by Klaus Schorka and the Munich School and Nagy and Fredericks several times. But I'd like to also answer that question perhaps a bit more as a human and poetically as well. I think world Christianity at its best, to riff on Simone Weil, is a way in which we decenter our own senses of divinity, our own senses of being a center, our own senses too of being on margins, and to see and encounter for a privileged glimpse or two the fullness of divinity in the world. And I think there is the scholarly understanding of what world Christianity is, but at the end of the day, divinity is so beyond, and divinity is a mystery and is an invitation into that. So
That is beautiful, and I love that poetic way of looking at it. That we're decentering our senses of divinity, and you know, God is, you know, present, but the way that God is present, right? There's so much to explore, and we're so thankful that you are part of this World Christianity community, bringing these sorts of insights into discourse with others, and I count it a privilege to be a colleague. And so, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
And appreciate you sharing a little bit about your story. And we do hope that we'll continue to be able to engage with you in your work in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Easton. It's a delight always.
My pleasure.
Privilege.
Thank you so much.